Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting of the DeKalb City Council, March 25, 2019. I'd like to ask our City Clerk, Lynn Fazekas, to call the roll, please.
Jacobson. Finucane.
Here.
Stupija.
Here.
Fagan.
Here.
Noriko.
Here.
Verbeek.
Here.
Favor.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
7 present.
Thank you. Our next item is to approve tonight's agenda. If there are no additions or deletions to tonight's agenda, I would entertain a motion to approve this evening's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Alderman Noriko, seconded by Alderman Fagan. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Stupija.
Yes.
Fagan.
Yes.
Noriko.
Yes.
Verbeek.
Yes.
Favor.
Yes.
Finucane.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
7-0.
Thank you. The agenda is accepted as printed. We only have 2 items on the agenda this evening, and prior to getting into the first one, a couple of housekeeping reminders. We do have public participation next on the agenda. If anybody would like to speak during that portion on any item, not necessarily those on the agenda, they may do so. And also, if someone would like to speak to one or both of the 2 items on tonight's agenda, they may do so by filling out a speaker request form, giving it to our City Clerk, Lynn Fazekas, and we'll get you on at the appropriate time. For those who would like to speak tonight, we would like to urge you to try to stay within the 3-minute limitation. One other final note, and that is that after consulting with our city manager earlier today, and as members of the City Council know, that whenever we have 2 items on our Committee of the Whole meeting, sometimes they tend to run a little bit long. I don't expect that to be the case tonight, but if in fact we are still tied up on the first consideration tonight, and that is the discussion on our parking regulations, I may make the move to ask you to consider moving the sign code discussion to a later date. But let's hope we can get through both of those tonight in due time. And at this point, we have nobody who has indicated they'd like to speak. So I'd like to ask City Manager Bill Nicholas to introduce item number 1, suggested revisions to the city's downtown parking regulations.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, everybody. I'm going to very briefly suggest a new scheme for downtown parking regulations. There's some considerable background here that lays that out. I'll be hitting the highlights of that. And joining me tonight, this rather forbidding gentleman in black next to me, Commander Craig Woodruff, who has spent a lot of time, probably as much as anybody who works for the city of DeKalb, in the downtown area over the last year, talking to all the stakeholders, by which I mean residents, businesses, also talking to the shoppers and shop owners, of course. So what we have for you tonight, which is pictured in, Jeff, if you can throw that map up. May as well get to that right now. I've given you a copy. Well, we're going to walk through it. There it is. Okay, good. I've also given you a hard copy of this. It's a little hard to read from that distance, I suppose. But let me tell you where we are. So right now in the downtown area, we have a variety of parking regulations affecting on-street parking, for example. We have some that are an hour, some are 90 minutes, some are 2 hour. Also in our various parking lots, there are different restrictions on how long you can park, and of course there are overnight parking restrictions so that we can do some street cleaning or snow plowing. We have, interestingly, just under 1,000 spaces, 998, I believe, to be exact, in downtown. But as we've talked off and on here for a while, and probably for decades, it's all about how fast you can get to the front door of where you're aiming to be. And so we're trying to, with the land that we have devoted to parking, we're trying to create regulations that provide for some overturn or turnover of space that's more valuable during regular working hours, and then after the normal working day for most people, after 6 o'clock or so, opening that up so that first come, first serve will still work on the streets, but you won't have to go out and move your car after 3 hours or 2 hours or whatever it is. So let me just hit very, very quickly what the restrictions are that are proposed. And then Commander Woodruff is going to talk a little bit about the permit system that has been a little bit in the news, and we'll give you some more details on that. So what we're looking to do is change nearly all the on-street parking, as well as parking in 3 lots. Embry and Van Buren lots you know about, Pond, a little bit smaller over on the east end. These would change to 3-hour parking between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. with no parking between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. to allow for cleaning and snow plowing.
Bill, did you want the listing now to be up on the screen?
Well, we could do that. Jeff, although it's in your background, however
Okay.
you'd like it.
I'm just thinking of
Okay.
people who are watching at home who
Good,
may be
good
interested
point.
in.
We're coming up here now. Okay. So that will change from 2 to 3 hours. And the general consensus downtown is that whereas 2 hours seemed a little bit tight for people who wanted to take in a meal and then do some shopping or wanted to go to a Saturday matinee or something like that, the 3 hours seems to help during the day. All right. Also, residents may purchase parking permits, and we have proposed a price of $120 a year for those parking permits. Is that correct?
After speaking with some of the residents, we were going to revise that.
Okay. All right. I'll yield to Jeff. So what we had in your background is $120 a year. Now, since we had the meeting downtown on the 19th, there's been more discussion, which is good. We were trying to generate that, and there's a range now of suggestions, and some are suggesting a lower price than that. But the parking permits would allow persons who have residence in the downtown to have a place where they could put their car overnight without having to wake up, set the alarm every 3 hours, and go out and move the car. They can do that. But if they don't, if they choose not to buy a permit, then overnight parking is first come, first serve, and they would run afoul of that 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. Issue. Unrestricted daytime parking would be allowed in 9 city parking lots. So those are the areas that are usually within a block of wherever you want to go, but they're just a little bit beyond the main drag, so to speak, in town. So we're trying to make it clear that parking is available. And by the way, the sort of the backstory here is whatever you decide and however you direct us, we're going to have to do some new signage in the downtown to make it more obvious what the restrictions are and also where the parking is. And we have done some of that wayfinding in the past couple of years. It's definitely improved the visibility of our lots and what the rules are, but we can do better, and we would intend to do that whatever you decide. I'm going to pause there. I'm going to yield to Commander Woodruff, who will talk a little bit about the permit system and tell you how that would work according to this proposal.
Thank you, sir. Currently, the downtown permitting is done by the finance department. That duty would switch to the police department. We do all of the permitting for the rest of town with safe streets and such. So we would administer it in basically the same way. The same hang tags, just a different color that we use. The permitting currently is $120 for the downtown residents. However, with that permitting, they've only sold in finance 10 or 15 each year. It's very, very limited. So we're not getting the residents to park where we would like them to park, and instead they're doing the traditional jump back and forth between each parking lot. So for example, on the map in front of you, if you look at the Glidden parking lot and the Elwood parking lot on North 2nd Street, one night you can't park in it on, say, Monday and Wednesday, so they park in Elwood. Well, you can't park in Elwood on Tuesday and Thursday, so they jump back and forth between the lots. We've got a lot of feedback from the downtown residents that that's a hassle. It's just, you don't know which one you're in, and if you make a mistake, you get a parking ticket. Of course, it says you can't park there on Monday night. Well, is that Sunday night? Is that Monday morning? It confuses some people. So with the downtown permitting, the lines that are in orange with the numbers on them indicate the spot that we would be marking off as reserves parking and the number of spots in each of the lots. So for those, you would be exempt from the 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. bans, and you can park there all day, of course, too. And that way, the residents have a designated spot where they can park, where they know they're going to be able to park, and other visitors and such would be restricted not to park in those. The only lots that we're not going to allow any residential parking would be Van Buren, Embry, and Pond. The thought there is that Embry and Van Buren are the most central. They receive the most traffic for people trying to get out of the car, walk to the confectionery, walk to the Egyptian, things like that. So we want to make sure that we keep those moving for people that are coming and going. If you're going to see a more extended show at the Egyptian, park a quarter block away at Elwood, you walk down the street, maybe get some chocolates, go into the show. After talking with a lot of the residents about why we're not selling that many of these permits and why people are not taking advantage of that, the price has come up quite a bit. Speaking with them and trying to view all of the downtown, the diversity of incomes that are down there, the diversity of apartments that are down there, with Mr. Pappas's projects versus some of the older apartments, generally people are saying it's simply too expensive, that they would not pay for it. They'll just jump back and forth. So after trying for some consensus on some level of what people think a good payment amount would be, around $50 has come up. Hoping therefore we would sell more of those, and therefore we get more people using those parking spots. That's gone all the way from $50 to $1,000. Of course, I don't think $1,000 is going to sell very many at all. The rest of it, as you can see, the one point I would make is the large parking lots are open all day, and the on-street parking is the 3 hours from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So what that means is that if at 3:15 you park downtown and start some shopping, go see a show, get some dinner, you're fine from 3:15 until 2 a.m. So it's really opening up the downtown to get down there and walk around, see our shops, have some dinner, have some fun, but at the same time, keep things moving in the most equitable way we can, trying to build that consensus between the merchants and the residents and the businesses that are downtown.
Okay, well,
that's our proposal.
let's see if we have any discussion or any questions. Alderman Fagan.
Commander Woodruff,
Yes, sir.
the fees, you're talking about $120 down to $50 and up and down. How are you making these people pay? Because $120 is not much for a year, but it is for initial outlay. So I guess
Agreed.
my question is, I mean, do you have it on a 3-month, 6-month?
Currently, I don't know all the details of finance. I believe they will let you go down to a 6-month separation of it. Typically for Safe Streets, we have a $25 fee, so it's a one-time
Right.
payment, but that's
But you don't, you see what I'm saying? If you
I
did
do.
maybe a 3 or 6 month. Because it's at 50 sounds so cheap, but $10 a month sounds cheap too.
And I agree. And speaking with some of the residents down there, I think the trick is, it's 50 is cheap, but you can do it for free if you don't mind the inconvenience of walking a little further or moving parking lots back and forth. So we're always going to be battling how much people are willing to pay for the convenience of a parking spot versus free and they can just move around.
Right. And I guess, the city manager, my question is, on this map here, you've got like Vaughn, 28, Gerler, 17. That's how many spots you're talking about for the?
Right.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Alderman Enrico?
What is the objective with the residential parking permit? I mean, it doesn't seem like the objective is to really get revenue. I mean, because, at either, $50 or even the $120 figure, we aren't talking about significant revenue. So what's the purpose of the permits? Is it so that the police actually have an idea of how many people, are residents who technically belong in that area overnight?
It serves several different purposes. From the residents' perspective, we're saying at a certain hour, you can go out here, you can park all day, actually, right, at the permit price. So you're off in the morning when people are out shopping, whether it's weekend or weekday. Doesn't matter, you paid for the permit, you're in a permit lot, you can leave your car there, you don't have to worry about moving it. From the standpoint of others, it puts the cars or the vehicles that are going to take up space all day potentially a little further out from the central area of shopping and service in the downtown area. So it's trying to look in two ways at the same time and serve a couple different purposes.
So it's to really highlight the convenience of being able to park in an assigned spot where you're still relatively close to not only your residents, but downtown businesses and so forth.
You could theoretically park if you have that reserve sticker or hang tag. You park on the far north or the far south side, and some places a little bit further in. There's a lot of places to park. No place is more than 2 blocks away from where you live. And most of the time, it's just 1 block or just a block around the corner or something like that. And we had a couple people at the meeting on the 19th that said, "Hey, I came from Chicago," or "I came from wherever, Glen Ellen, and I could never park. I had to go 5 blocks to get to a place, and that was a parking garage, and I never felt real good about that." So it's just this is what we're used to, and we're also used to the possibility if you drive around enough, you'll find a spot right where you want to go. But we're trying to hit a happy medium here, which means it's not perfect in any direction, but it's as close as we can come to satisfying all the various publics, and we have multiple publics.
Yeah, obviously. I think some of it is marketing the convenience.
I think you're right.
And I don't have great ideas for that, but just I think that would be useful. So. But thank you for all your efforts. I know it's tough listening to both sides, and even in addition to both sides, there are the outlier positions, and and everybody thinks they're right, and I think you've made a noble effort trying to, that golden mean.
Well, the kudos go to Commander Woodruff and some others, not so much to me. I came here for the sum of it all, but I appreciate, having gone to some meetings now, what the different stakeholders think, and also the work, as you say, that's gone into trying to balance this. I support the plan as presented to you. The pricing is something we are looking for some direction on. One way to make the 120 feel a little bit better is to space it out a couple payments a year. It's a little more overhead on our side to track and trace, and if people paid the first time and they're thinking, well, maybe they'll forget about the second time, we got to go after it. the advantage, as Commander Woodruff said, of that lower amount, maybe it's not 50, maybe it's just a little bit north of that you pay once, and it's not so much about the money, but it's in the door, and we try it for a year. And if that doesn't seem to be fair, if we don't get a lot of permit applications, then I think we can adjust. Or if we get all that we thought, we hit it.
Yeah, in looking at the background information, two sentences really stood out to me. One is, as you suggest, a perfect consensus does not exist even after many forums and meetings. The other sentence that I think is very, very telling and meaningful, and that is that the key to the success of any downtown parking program is accurate and custom-friendly signage or wayfinding. So as you suggest, we're going to have to make some changes. But I think once people get attuned to what changes we may come up with and what changes will impact them, I think we're a step ahead of the game. Yeah, did you want to say something, Mike, and then Bill?
Has there been great work, Commander, to reach out and get that engagement, which is key to this? Was there any engagement along the way or discussion about standing up a parking app for the Central Business District? In other words, owners invest. We have 998 spaces. Seemingly, most of us have smartphones. So, could we, let's give them something for their money. If they're paying their $120 or their $50, stand up an app. We can show everyone where the parking spaces are available, and it's made much easier. Has that come up at all?
It has. I've
Okay.
looked into it. There is one particular company that's very popular in the suburbs, Joliet and a bunch of other places use it. It's usually for permitted time, so it's with the smartphone app, it's for 1 hour, 2 hour, things like that. The trouble with it is the upfront cost. So most of those, I shouldn't say most of them, many of them have sensors in the ground saying where the empty parking spots are, things like that, things that we're just not able to attain right now. So, but looking forward, sure, I would love it, but it's just getting
City Manager Nicholas, you had a point.
Well, I'm just letting that's a great idea. We'll but maybe let the Alderman ask a question first.
Yeah, Alderman Favor?
So I'm shocked that somebody would rather go outside on a 20-degree below zero day and move their car on Tuesday over to the Monday lot or whatever, twice a week. That isn't worth 33 cents a day to do that. But I don't know. So one of the questions I did have is most of the residential parking is geared toward, it's all moved closer to downtown as opposed to being on the outside of the lots or further away from downtown, which I don't know. I guess my thought is that we would put the permanent parking further away from downtown and have the closer in lots available to visitors and things like that.
Actually, that's the case. Maybe I didn't explain it right. I'll let Matt.
Yeah, the thought process was that because we are restricting Van Buren and Embry, the closest lots for the customers, and we're pushing the residents a little further out, they'll be in the Elwood and Glidden lot, but they'll be in those lots closest to the residents that they can. So that was the compromise. We could put them on the other end of the lot, so they'd be, maybe 30, 40 yards further away. But in order to keep it appealing and that balance, we wanted to say, okay, we're pushing you out to this further lot, but we're giving you the best spot we can in that lot.
Right.
And I should add, some of the impetus for this too is the downtown with the two new buildings going up, Cornerstone and Plaza, we anticipate more cars downtown. So to Ms. Noriko's question earlier, that is also some of why we're marketing the resident spots, to get compliance, because we're concerned that without a plan for these people to park someplace, then they're going to park wherever they want, and then we're going to end up with a mess.
I completely agree with the wayfinding, even if it's just the little, blue and white P with an arrow, just down all the connectors and right down Lincoln Highway so you can see where to go. I think that would go a long way in assisting with the parking. My other question is, how are we going to enforce the parking?
We, last summer, we hired 2 new parking CSOs whose primary duty is safe streets in the downtown parking. They have other duties as well, but they are out there to chalk tires and enforce the parking as best we can.
Okay.
Officers, of course, still do it as well, especially the overnight hours.
Okay, perfect. I wasn't aware of that. Thank you.
Alderman Verbeek?
Commander, was there any discussion along the way about the availability of a premium parking space? In other words, someone wants a space that they can count on, perhaps in the Vaughn lot, and they would be willing to pay in the hundreds of dollars per year for that spot to know that that spot is there. I know that those would have to be very limited, or else you're all of a sudden out of parking. But did that discussion come up along the way?
It came up on March 19th. One of the local business persons who has a business right downtown said, I'd be willing to, I referenced it in the background, I'd be willing to pay $400 or up from that. He aimed a little low. Somebody else said it ought to be $1,000 because at NIU, I think if you get a kind of the universal permit all year round, it's pushing up about $1,000. And he laughed and he said, I'm probably the only one who would pay that, but he said he gets in at 6:30 in the morning and he doesn't leave till 6 or 7 at night. He doesn't want to move his car, and he doesn't want to walk a block. So, I mean, I don't think there'd be many, but we could consider that. Getting to the price, we just had a little huddle here. We heard some other numbers other than the 50. I thought that was a little low ball myself, whether you pay it at once or more than once. 75 was put out on the 19th by a couple of people who are downtown. We had an interesting mix that night. It was designed anybody could come, but it was designed to bring out more of the residents. But there was about half residents, half other business people who just hadn't had a chance to come to any of the other forums. So 75 was heard by several people, one resident, one shop owner. So I think that'd be fine if that would be a good starting place. I think it's a little more appropriate than the 50.
But that premium notion didn't come up until
the 19th.
So nothing with you, Commander, and in your past. That's what I was getting at, was your discussions in the past.
In the past, there were a couple of spots in one of the lots reserved for businesses. They were a little bit more expensive. I believe they were $175. Okay. We were intending to do away with those because you can park in those lots all day long. The premium came up because this gentleman was not talking about parking in a parking lot. He's talking about parking on the street, right in front of his business. Yeah. And that's certainly a valid thing to consider, but with the balance, that's also kind of goes against what some of the retail establishments were looking for.
Thank you.
Alderman Stupedja.
I think at this point, what I'm hearing is that we're looking for direction as to where we should come as the permanent price. And I would feel right around 75, and this would be my reasoning for that, because I was at that meeting, and I did listen to a few of the residents that were concerned about anything more than that because of the lack of income, whatever. But I also think that with that, it would have to be paid once a year, so we don't have a buildup of bookkeeping and a waste of time and energy. That would be my thought on that.
Thank you.
Alderman Fanouken.
Just a couple quick questions, Commander. So when we're talking about the yearly permit, would those be calendar year? Would they be a year from the date of purchase? How do you propose doing that?
The same as we do Safe Streets. It'll be August to August. We coincide with the semesters. If you live here year-round, it's not that big of a deal, but if you're going to school, that certainly makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Norrico.
I would certainly support the $75 figure. Yeah, $50 from 120 seems like quite a drop. $75, I think indicates the city's trying to work with residents, but, and one time, as Alderman Stapedgia said, to reduce the bookkeeping and administrative overhead. You have enough to do.
Does there seem to be consensus that the $75 figure payable one time for a year makes some sense? And if I see some head shaking, yes, I would.
Only one other thing there.
Yeah. And
No
then
refunds, if somebody says, well, now I'm moving, it's a $75 flat. If you move, unfortunately, you lost out.
Okay. Alderman Fagan.
I've got a question. So would that be prorated? I mean, if you moved in July? Or
Today?
how does that work, I guess?
If you moved in July, we would, for the most part, we try to make everything work out as easy as we can for everybody. We're not letter of trying to make this difficult. So
You are the letter of the law.
that's why I didn't finish the sentence. We try to work with people as best we can. We try to make all of this as simple.
And I understand Safe Streets is
Sure.
August, because most student leases are that way, but downtown leases are a little different. That's the question I asked.
Yes, so that's a very good point. We had not considered the prorating. With Safe Streets, again, we have not, but that's the $25 thing. The difficulty with any of the partial years is our current mechanism is the hang tag, and then we have a sticker that goes on there, much like your license plate, that says 2019. So that's how you're allowed to park there. If that were to start early or start late, we would have to come up with a mechanism for that.
Right,
I'm sure we can accommodate that if that's the direction. We would just have to figure out that.
I'm just saying that, as long as you work with people on that.
Absolutely.
And when we want to make it easier for everyone, including the police department, so that we're not looking at two different colors or whatever.
Exactly.
Right. Thank you.
Alderman Jacobson.
Again, the mechanism to do that is by prorating it. You leave them on the annual cycle. Say if they come in December, they're using this year's sticker still, this year's color, but they don't have to pay for the whole year. And again, if that's the plan to do, then I'd suggest a number that's more divisible by 12 months, if that's the hope, because it makes it very easy for whoever's at the counter, whoever's placing it, to say, well, you've gone through this month, and this month, and it's $7 a month. So this is what you owe for the rest of the year, and you may have to come in 3 months to get your new sticker based on when your timing of your lease is. And yes, it's a bit more of a hassle, but it makes it much easier for us to use those annual passes going forward. I mean, that's how we do it on Greek Row in the private properties. If somebody moves in for the year, I give them a 2018-19 pass, but they only pay for half that year or per month.
If I might jump in on this point, I'll tell you what the finance department is doing currently. They do prorate them if you come in late in the year. However, they don't prorate it every single month. So what they'll typically do is once you reach the halfway point in the year, they'll prorate it at a 6-month price, but they won't go beyond that. So there's one point in the year where they prorate it at a reduced fee.
That's fine.
So what I hear is that the plan as outlined in the background material, even though it will be somewhat experimental, as is the case with any new plan, that council is supportive of that, and that we would be supportive of a $75 yearly payable one-time to the city for a yearly pass. If someone does need a proration, Dave suggested a month. Ray suggested that what we're doing so far is a half a year. Any thought on that?
Half a year.
Yeah, Alderman Fanouken.
Actually, I do, Dave, you're going to be surprised. I like your idea. Because, there is some additional cost to us by prorating it one way or the other. So like at $7 a month, So like that way, if somebody came in 6 months in, it'd be $42, but that's usually a, 7 per, that's pretty easy to figure out. If it's 10 months or less, then it's a better deal to pay per month. But you still have to do it through the August deadline.
Yes.
Yeah,
I see
so,
what you mean.
and just out of curiosity, Craig, August 1, August 31, August 15th, what's your thoughts
August 1.
on? August 1?
August 1.
Okay. So I think that might be a easy way for the department to work on a prorated, at least they know what the number is.
And explain that again, Bill.
Sure, so as Dave suggested, it'd be $7 per month prorated.
Mhm.
So if somebody came in May, and they have May, June, July, they'd have to pay $21. But if they came in earlier, it'd be an additional $7 per month.
But you're still comfortable with the $75 annual?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because,
Good.
7 times 12 is 84.
Yeah,
So
right,
we're-
right.
In essence, we're cutting them a break by
We're-
buying the annual pass.
Right. Okay. $75 annual, $7 per monthly prorated.
Yes.
If we can get that language, does that make sense to you, Commander Woodruff?
Yes,
And okay, City Manager Nicholas?
Yes.
Okay, any further comments on the parking proposal as outlined by staff? Okay, we don't need a vote. You have consensus?
No, thank you.
Bring that back to another meeting,
We have a number of changes to make in the ordinances. We'll bring them back as soon as we can.
please. Okay, let's
Thank you.
move along to the second consideration tonight, and that is suggested revisions to the city's sign code. And City Manager Nicholas, if you would give us a brief review of that, please.
Now we're going to do a little musical chairs. I'm going to have Dean Frieders come up here and
Okay?
join me. While we're doing this, I'll just open up by saying that now we move into something a little more esoteric in terms of the origins of the issue, which was outside of the comings and goings here in DeKalb, but has to do with high court decisions that affect how communities like ours, or communities anywhere in the country, can regulate content-based signage. And if you followed through my logic in the background, and I wasn't attempting to replicate all of the legal arguments, but things have changed just in the last year or two in the way communities like ours can regulate signage. It used to be you could make some distinctions according to some rational method between not only the size but also the content between, say, a religious sign and a bowling sign and the like. The content weighs a lot heavier now since the Supreme Court ruled in the Gilbert's decision. And that has implications for us. And in the background, I gave you a couple of examples. For instance, in the past, we've not been real keen on having off-premises signs. Those signs that pop up often on a weekend, whether everything from garage sales to a housing, just 120 homes for sale. You know, you see these popping up. It's nicer. We're probably going to start seeing them. Another one might say model homes for sale, and we might say that's not allowed, but there might be some advertising of cars that might be allowed. That distinction would be considered unconstitutional now. Another example of what might be unconstitutional, if the city indicates that retail shops will have building-mounted signs up to a certain dimensional width, but churches can only have one sign and according to a different type of width and shape and size. We can't do that anymore, but that's how our sign code basically runs. So the gist of all this is that, oh, and another one which you've heard here before, I imagine most communities are wrestling with this, movable text signs. In the past, some judgments have been made that only financial institutions, say, could do that. If you're selling beds, you can't do that. You know, come on in, great pricing. Now that distinction is no longer considered rational. There's a higher level of scrutiny that has to apply, and that would be considered unconstitutional. Dean could fill in any gaps, and I've left huge gaps on the legal history here. But what's the implication for us here? It's a good old-fashioned line-by-line exegesis of the sign code. We're just going to have to start at the beginning and work through to the end. Some of it won't be all that torturous. We still have the ability to regulate things for which there is no lower level of scrutiny or standard. As an example, we have vision triangles at intersections. Courts would normally, whatever the level of court would allow for the fact that if we don't regulate signage there, we could be creating a hazard for motorists and pedestrians and so forth. There might be adult entertainment stores that the courts have said we ought to be able to define what is allowable in terms of signage within certain parameters. Or smoking paraphernalia, alcohol, service of beverages and so forth, signage that might be specific to one particular age group that would be permissible. Those things are okay, but that's not the bigger part of our sign code. We have a traditional sign code that deals with sizes and shapes and locations by type of enterprise, and that is where we get into the issues, and that's where we have probably a number of concerns. And I'll yield to Dean if you want to add anything, or no?
No, that pretty thoroughly covers it. Our current sign code essentially needs a complete rewrite. It's not something where we would recommend trying to piecemeal make revisions to it. The vast majority of the sign code reflects previous council's directions and preferences with regard to different types of businesses or enterprise. And that's exactly what the town of Gilbert's case that we cited related to. It had one set of standards for model homes and a different set of standards for churches. So it would be a complete rewrite of the sign code, and we would recommend that that be undertaken before the city engages in substantial enforcement activity based on the current sign code provisions.
Before what, Dean?
Before the city engages in substantial enforcement activity of the current sign code.
If an example, we could go out there right now, even with the new rules, we could probably cherry pick and see there's a couple here and a couple there that are just egregious, and we could attack those, but then we're not doing so in an even-handed way. That leaves us open to complaint and to a suit at some point. So here's what I suggest. This is not something we can do between now and the next meeting. It's wish that were the case. We could just assign a couple people, go through this and fix it. And we're not going to be able to afford to hire legal counsel to do this exclusively at the expense of other things that we need to do. So it's probably something we'll do on staff as judiciously and deliberately as possible. I can't right now say until we actually throw ourselves into it how long it will take, but I think 90 days probably. It's a long code. It's the biggest chapter probably in our amongst the sign ordinances and UDO. So if that's agreeable to you, we'll make our best effort. So many hours a week, it'd be myself probably, and Dan Olson, he doesn't want to hear that, and Stan here, and a few others looking at it, you know, from a legal perspective, from maybe a law enforcement perspective, as we get drafts, and then we'll bring them to you and let you review, and we'll eventually have a corpus that we feel is defensible in a court of law.
Alderman Norrico.
I know the city has been criticized pretty vigorously for lack of enforcement of the current sign code. And I think part of the difficulty with the enforcement has been the lack of consistency and coherence and, you know, the lack of understanding of it, you know, on the part of city residents. And so I think this is a wonderful effort and will be much appreciated. I would encourage those who are, who will undertake this onerous task to, you know, both think about, you know, the legality and the coherence, and also what is reasonable in terms of enforcement, given the city's current resources. I mean, there might be a thought about, you know, changing the code related to a certain kind of sign, maybe a very prevalent sign, but, you know, how reasonable is it going to be to go after everyone who might violate that? I'm not saying that we shouldn't have, you know, standards and so forth, but there's going to have to be a balance, and I trust that city staff can meet that balance.
I will say, although we have some unique variations in our code probably that are in tune with our own circumstances, I'll wager to say that there are some models out there that have been used by some pioneering communities who have already taken steps to adapt to the new court rulings, and we're gonna, that's the first thing I'm gonna do is go out and look and see what we can find that we can maybe, it might be easier to do that and revise somewhat than to go through a kind of gooey corpus that we currently have that is mostly going to be tossed out. So I think maybe I'd rather start there with something that looks pretty solid, maybe been tested, and add in any unique characteristics that we should have here, which probably aren't many. I mean, we're not, we have the same range of signs that most communities in Illinois and in the country have. So
again, pulling out a sentence from the background information, it's as the city manager is recommending the thorough review, which we've discussed here in a relatively short time. But I thought what you said here, the first step toward a thorough revision of the sign codes will be the creation of a working standard for applying a strict level of scrutiny so the city can remain open for business. I echo what Alderman Norrico says, and that is that we have had a number of citizen scrutiny, if you will, on their own to look at signage. And my first reaction was, you know, if we have a sign code that we can't enforce, maybe we should just take it off the books. But the more I thought of that, that doesn't make sense. You know, I mean, I've said a lot of things in my life that don't make sense, and that was certainly one of them. But you see where I was going with that, and that is that I think we have to take this strict level of scrutiny as is outlined in this proposal, or excuse me, recommendation, and run with that. Alderman Jacobson.
Obviously, this is likely going to go beyond my term in the seat. Again, dealing with the sign code personally before, and probably being the only one up here that's ever been cited for a sign code violation. Again, the reality is our interest is in making sure they're safe and what's defined as a sign. Again, the reason we're not enforcing our code is because it's utter foolishness. It's not an onus to go into the Wendy's drive-thru and see a Wendy's sign on their own fence that they own. It's not an onus to be walking down the street downtown and see Cracker Jack's tiny little chalkboard sign that reminds people, hey, we're down the street. We're not on the main drag, but if you're here, come see us. It doesn't hurt any of us. It's not a big deal. It's not out of the way. And yet our code has these just outrageous, extraneous things that, again, you can't enforce them. You want your residents to be able to have garage sales. That's typical in any community. Technically, our sign code requires that you go get a permit for that. But if you're a realtor and you're advertising a house, you don't. And if you want to be a business and you have a logo for your business, you can't display it if it's a person, like the KFC sign. You can't display merchandise like the bike shop has their sign. Again, they're not onerous. They're not hurting anyone. They're not doing anything out of the course of advertising a business to get people's interest, which signs are there to do. And I think that's why ours has gotten so outrageous. So I would say slim it down, make it as simple as possible, make it safe. No, you don't want those windsock types on a corner where you can't see around them. No, you don't want them at the entrance on Lincoln Highway where someone can get hit on a motorcycle because you can't see past them. Those make sense. Again, beyond that, there's other questions. When you're talking about the movable text signs, that's where a lot of these signs are going today. That's the technology that's out there, and they become so high-tech and so advertising. That's what high-tech, big-volume businesses want at their business. And it's a process to even come in and ask us to try to do those things. Again, if you want to regulate for how bright it is, if you want to regulate for anything in the windows. Again, I'm over on Greek Row where there's several businesses now with the LED light strips in their walls that are distracting while driving for certain when you come to those intersections because they're so bright and they're flashing, especially in the reds and blues where flashing red and blue LEDs generally means something else when you're in your vehicle. So again, it's when you're looking at those things, make it safe, make it make sense, and leave the business owners alone. They're trying to make a living here. And if they're advertising in that way, it's because they're having difficulty bringing in revenue without it.
Thank you. Alderman Verbeek.
And for me, largely the complaints over my first 2 years have just been related to torn, tattered, sun-faded, blowing in the wind kind of things, which I'm sure that will be allowable within what we're discussing. So thank you for the work, and I look forward to the outcomes.
Any other comments? If not, I would thank you, Bill, and Dean, and Commander Woodruff on the parking consideration. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn the Committee of the Whole meeting.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Alderman Norrico, seconded by Alderman Verbeek. Any further comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. City Council starts at 6 o'clock.